Hey folks, this video aspires to teach Google Apps Script's Spreadsheet app library to beginners. Google Apps Script is Google's version of the JavaScript language, and it allows you to augment Google Drive file types such as documents, sheets, and slides. Our focus today is going to be on the Spreadsheet app. So you will need a Google Sheets workbook with some data, and we are going to be focusing on a general overview of some of the things that you potentially would like to do with Spreadsheet app. So it's not going to be 100% comprehensive, but it's meant as a gateway for individuals who are looking to learn how to code using Google Apps Script. If you are new to programming, I have a fundamentals video, which will be linked in the description. I think there are some valuable principles in there that will help you with this lesson and any future projects you might look to undertake using Apps Script. We're going to be using a bound Apps Script today. So we will be navigating to the extensions menu of your spreadsheet, and then we will be opening up Apps Script. You have the ability to use a bound or unbound script. The benefit of a bound script is that you have access to some functionality that is not available in an unbound script. I will make note of that when we get to that point in the video. But we are going to begin by titling our project. So I'm just going to call mine Spreadsheet App for Beginners. I'm going to hit enter. I am going to add a script file, and I am going to call it a_access_WB, which will be our shorthand in this video for workbook. We're going to hit enter. We'll be renaming the function. So the boilerplate will always say function my function. We are going to have a couple different script files, so we don't want them to have the same name because it can cause issues when attempting to run them. So we're going to call it we're going to call this access capital W lowercase b. We're going to go to line 2. We're going to hit enter. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and we will say first method for accessing a workbook. We will be saving our project. So there are 3 primary methods that you can use in order to access a workbook. So after line 3, we're going to hit enter and then tab, and we are going to declare a variable called WB1. We're going to set that equal to Spreadsheet app. So all of the work that we do in this video is going to focus on Spreadsheet app. So you can access the functions within Spreadsheet app by using a dot. So this will give you plenty of functions to use with Spreadsheet app. It's not all of the functions that you can use because some of the functions have nested functionality within them. But this is the first point. So for our purposes, we are going to use get capital A active spreadsheet. We're going to have an open parentheses here. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and we're going to add a semicolon. So spreadsheet app.getActiveSpreadsheet will allow you to access the spreadsheet that your app script is bound to. So if you are using an unbound app script file, you will not be able to use the getActiveSpreadsheet method. We are using a bound app script file. So that means that we have the ability to use getActiveSpreadsheet. We're going to hit enter once, twice. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and we will say logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to use capital L logger.log, and then we will reference the workbook1 variable that we just created. We're going to add a semicolon. We'll hit save, and then we're going to run our project. We're going to review permissions, which is how we authorize AppScript's ability to access our Google Sheets workbooks. So we're going to select our email address. We're going to get this aggressive warning that is just coming from Google to say that it has not verified the code that you're attempting to run using AppScript. We're going to use the advanced, and then we're going to go down to go to Spreadsheet app for beginners unsafe. Again, this verbiage is just because Google has not reviewed the code that we are attempting to run. So it is giving you warnings to say, please make sure you know what this code is doing. Because when you allow the Spreadsheet app access to your spreadsheet, you are allowing it to see, edit, create, and delete all your Google Sheets spreadsheets. Now, that is not what we are doing, but again, Google just wants you to know that that potential exists when you allow code to run. So we're going to hit allow. And now that we've authorized the Spreadsheet app, you can see that our execution log is returning a spreadsheet. This is the exact type of logging that we want to see. The next method for accessing a workbook, so we're going to be on line 7, and we're going to hit enter 2 times. And then we're going to hit the left arrow on our keyboard 4 times. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and then we are going to say second method for accessing a workbook. I'm going to hit enter and tab, and we are now going to use a variable, and we'll set it to WB2, and we'll set it equal to spreadsheet app.open by ID. We'll have an open parentheses, and then we're going to add single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter what you use, but you should remain consistent throughout your project. My preference is to use single quotes. Additionally, this method is my preferred method for accessing workbooks when I'm scripting using AppScript. Identification numbers are secure methods of developing logic because they don't change. Names will change, other things will change, but the identification number will not change unless if the thing is deleted. So I encourage you to use the ID, but you know, there are 3 methods to use. So I'm going to go up to my spreadsheet, and you can find the ID by going to the URL of your workbook. And then you will find the ID after the docs.google.com / whatever your file type is. So it doesn't matter if it's a doc or a sheet or a slide deck or whatever. And then you'll see that there's this /d/. It comes after the /d/ before the /edit. So we're going to copy that identification number, and we will paste it into the open by ID function. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice. We'll add a semicolon. We'll hit enter twice. 2 slashes for a comment, and then we'll say logging for transparency. We'll hit enter and tab. We will use logger.log, and then we will pass in WB2. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard, add a semicolon, and then hit run. And now you can see we are also returning a spreadsheet, which is precisely what we want to see. We're going to hit enter twice, left key on our keyboard 4 times, add 2 slashes for a comment, and now the third method for accessing a workbook. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we are going to declare a variable called WB3, and we will set that equal to S spreadsheet app.open by URL. It's the same setup as open by ID. We'll have a open parentheses with some single quotes. We'll go back to our spreadsheet. Instead of selecting just the ID, we can select the entire URL. We're going to copy it. We're going to go back to our app script. We're going to paste it inside of our single quotes or double quotes. And then we will hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will say logging for transparency. We'll hit enter, tab, logger.log, and then we will pass WB3. We will run our code, and you will see that all 3 methods are successfully returning a spreadsheet, which is exactly what we want to see. So it doesn't matter what method you use. I think some people could prefer the URL method because then you have direct access to your workbook. I prefer Open by ID, but you can also use Get Active Spreadsheet if you are using a bound script. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module and creating a new script file. We will be learning how to create and copy Google Sheets workbooks using AppScript. So we're going to call this b_create_copy. We are going to change the name of our function from my function to create C copy. We will save our project and resume on line 2 by hitting enter once and adding 2 slashes for a comment. We are going to create a workbook from scratch. We'll hit enter and tab, and we will declare a variable called WB, which is short for workbook, and we're going to set it equal to S spreadsheet A app dot create. We'll have an open parentheses. The create function takes one argument, which needs to be a string, and this will be the title of your newly created workbook. So I prefer to use single quotes. So I'm going to use single quotes and then say, this is my new workbook. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard twice. I'm going to add a semicolon, enter 2 times, 2 slashes for a comment, and then we'll say logging for transparency. Hit enter and tab, and then we'll say logger.log with an open parentheses, and then we will pass our WB variable. Now, because we are creating a new workbook, if we just log out WB, we're just going to see the word spreadsheet because WB is a spreadsheet. So we're going to use the .getURL method, capital U in URL, with an open parentheses, which will result in a URL appearing in our console log. So run your project if you haven't already, and you should see a link to a Google Sheets workbook. When we copy this link and open up a new browser tab, we paste the link into our URL bar, and now you can see we have this new workbook called This is My New Workbook. Wonderful. But it's a blank workbook, so it doesn't really serve us much purpose at the present moment. Another thing that you might want to do is create a copy of a pre-existing workbook. So what we're going to do is I have this spreadsheet that I will be using throughout this series that has some data in it. So we're going to create a copy of this workbook. We're going to go back to our app script and resume on line 7. We're going to hit enter twice and the left arrow on our keyboard 4 times. We'll hit slash twice for comment, and now we will create a copy of a workbook. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable called WB C copy. We'll set that equal to spreadsheet A app dot get active spreadsheet, open parentheses. So we learned this in our first file, where we learned 3 methods to access spreadsheets. So you either have to open the spreadsheet using its ID or using its URL. Because we're using a bound app script, we are able to use .getActive spreadsheet. So we're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and then we're going to hit dot, and then we have the ability to use the copy method. So we will use an open parentheses called copy, and we have the ability to name this copy. So the pre-existing version of my sheet is called Spreadsheet App. So we are going to call this example of copying a workbook. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice. We'll add a semicolon. We'll hit enter twice, and we'll use 2 slashes for a comment, and we'll say logging for transparency. We'll hit enter and tab, and then we will use our logger.log statement in order to get the URL of our WB copy variable. So we're going to type WB copy into our logger statement, and then we will say .get capital URL. We'll have an open parentheses. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice, and then we will run our script. So you can see that our console log has produced 2 URLs. The reason for that is because we are continuing to run our first line of code on line 4, where we are creating a new workbook called This Is My New Workbook. So if you do not comment that out, then that line of code will continue to execute every single time that you run your script. Our second URL is coming from line 10, where we created a copy of the Spreadsheet app workbook that has a data table in it. So when we copy this first URL here and open up a new tab in our browser, paste it into the URL bar, hit enter, you can see that we are now having a new workbook that is called Example of Copying a Workbook, and it has all of the data tabs that exist in our pre-existing workbook. Now, anytime that you create or copy a workbook without identifying or defining a destination, those copies and new workbooks will go to your Google Drive. So you can see that I have a couple copied workbooks here. So I have this is my new workbook, and then some tests that I ran. So we don't need these workbooks anymore. That was just an example of how we would go about creating copying them. So we're going to select the first one, hold down the shift key, and then select the last one, and then we were going to move them to the trash because we don't need them anymore. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module and selecting a new script file. We're going to be learning how to access sheets within the workbook. So we're going to call our file c_access_sheets. We'll begin by renaming our function to be called sheet A access. We'll save our project and navigate to line 2. We'll hit enter once, add 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will say access the workbook. We're going to hit enter, and we're going to declare a variable called WB, which will be set to Spreadsheet app. We'll use the dot method, and then you'll use one of the 3 methods that we discussed in the access workbook lesson. I'm going to use get active spreadsheet, and I'm going to have an open parentheses. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard, and I'm going to add a semicolon. This method only works because I am using a bound app script, which means that my app script project was created from a Google Sheets workbook. If you are using an unbound app script or trying to access a sheet in another workbook, you are going to need to use Open by ID or Open by URL in order to create your WB variable. We're going to hit enter twice, and we're going to hit left arrow on our keyboard twice. We're going to add slashes for a comment where we will say access the sheet. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable called sheet, which will be set equal to WB dot get sheet by name. We're going to have an open parentheses. This function takes one argument, which is a string. It will be the name of the sheet that you want to access. My preference is to use single quotes, but you can use double quotes. But again, it's best practice to remain consistent throughout your project. So keep using whatever you've been using to this point. We're going to navigate to the spreadsheet that we want to access, and we are going to click on the tab so that we can copy the name of the sheet. We'll navigate back to our app scripts project, where we will paste the name of the sheet into the get sheet by name method. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice. We're going to use a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will say logging for transparency. We'll hit enter and tab, and then we'll say logger.log, open parentheses, where we will pass our sheet variable. We'll add a semicolon to the end of our logger statement, and then we will run our script. You'll see that we are returning a sheet in our console, which means that we have successfully accessed the sheet. Now, in addition to accessing one sheet, you have the ability to collect all of the sheets. So we're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard 4 times, and we're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we're going to say access all the sheets. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable called sheets. We're going to set that equal to wb.getS sheets, and we'll have an open parentheses. Now, the important thing that you need to know about get sheets is that you can't use this variable the same way that you use the sheet variable, which is the get sheet by name function. So you'll notice that this documentation over here says it gets all the sheets in the spreadsheet, and that in order to access them, you need to use a for loop, which means that you will be returning an iterable. So let's log this out so that you can see what's happening. So we are going to add a semicolon at the end of get sheets, and we're going to hit enter twice. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and we're going to say logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to do logger.log, and then we will log out sheets. We will run our file, and now you can see that in addition to sheet, we are getting an array of sheet. So what's happening here is we only have one sheet in our workbook. So when you see these square brackets here, this is an indication that you're getting an array, which means that you have the ability to have comma-separated values. And the only way to access values in an array is by looping through them. So we're going to go back to our spreadsheet app, and we're going to add another tab into our workbook. We're going to go back to our app script, and we're going to run our project. And now you can see that when we use get sheet by name, we are returning an individual sheet. Whereas when we run get sheets, we are getting sheet, comma, sheet. So even though the computer does not identify it, we are returning sheet 1 and then sheet 2. So if you wanted to see a little bit more transparency in here, we can go to line 10 and we can do .get name, and we can add a parentheses to our sheet variable. And when we run this, we will return sheet 1. For our sheets method, we are still getting sheet, comma, sheet. And we can't do .get name because this is an array. So when we run this, we either get an error message or some type of null. So you can see here that sheets.getName is not a function. The only way for us to get the name of our sheets is to run a for loop on it. So I'm going to do that very quickly, but you don't have to if you don't want to. I'm going to hit enter twice. I'm going to hit the left arrow on my keyboard twice. I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment and then loop to get our sheet names. I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I'm going to do for open parentheses. I'm going to declare a variable of I for my iterable, and I'll say in sheets. I'll hit the right arrow on my keyboard. I'll hit space. I'll add curly brackets. I'll hit enter, and then I'll do logger.log sheets square bracket I. Go to the right of the square bracket dot get capital N name open parentheses, right arrow on my keyboard twice, semicolon. And now when we run it, we'll get the name of our sheet, we'll get our sheets array, which we are logging out on line 16, and then when we loop through each of our sheets, we get the sheet 1 and the sheet 2 name. Now, I present to you the sheets method in here so that you're aware of how to use it. I've had some comments on my videos where people have wanted to access more than one sheet. It does get a little bit more sophisticated when using a for loop and dynamically accessing multiple things at once. But I want you to be aware of this so that when you come into contact with it in the future, it's not the first time that you're seeing it. Now, one additional note that I would like to make about the getSheetByName method, it's perfectly fine in the beginning. I have no issues with it. It is prone to error though. And that error comes when the sheet name changes. So for example, we are using .getSheetByName, .getSheetByName on line 7, and we are passing in sheet 1. If I go to my sheet and I change the name of that tab to be called data, when I run my script, it's going to break because the sheet doesn't exist. It is no longer called sheet 1. It is now called data. So that means that I have to go back into my script file and I have to rerun my code after making the change. And then you can see it works successfully. Unfortunately, this is the only native method for the Spreadsheet app in order to access a sheet. I have a solution that I like to pursue where I create a custom function called getSheetById, where I use the identification number of the sheet in order to programmatically extract the name. That way, if the sheet name changes, my script doesn't break. I have a video on my channel that outlines how to create that function. And if you've watched any of my Google Sheets videos, you will see that I always add that function. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module, where we will be creating a new script file. This lesson is going to teach you how to access the data that exists in a single Google Sheet. So we're going to call this d_data_access. We're going to hit enter. We'll change the name of the function from my function to data, capital A, access. We will save our project and then select line 2. We'll hit enter once, add 2 slashes for a comment, and say access the workbook. We will be declaring a variable called WB, which is short for workbook, which will be set equal to Spreadsheet app dot. At this time, you'll use one of the 3 methods that we discussed in the access workbook lesson. I am using a bound app script, which means that I can use get active spreadsheet with an open parentheses. I'm going to hit the right arrow. I'm going to add a semicolon. If you are attempting to access a workbook from a unbound app script, or if you want to access data from another workbook that this app script is not bound to, then you'll need to use OpenById or OpenByURL. We'll hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, where we will say access the sheet. Hit enter, tab. Declare a variable called sheet, which will be set to wb.getSheetByName with an open parentheses. You'll use whatever quotation style you prefer, and then you will enter the name of the sheet that you want to access. My sheet is called data, so I've entered that. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard twice, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow 2 times, where we will add 2 slashes for a comment, where we will say access the range. We're going to hit enter and tab. So this is where we will pick up our lesson. So we're going to start learning some new stuff here. So we're going to declare a variable called range, which will be set equal to sheet.getRange. The getRange function takes 4 arguments. 2 are mandatory and 2 are optional. We will be using this spreadsheet tab here in order to get data out. So you can see that my data begins on row 1 and it starts in column 1. Those are the first 2 arguments of the getRange method. You need to declare your starting row, your starting column, the number of rows you want to go, and the number of columns that you want to go. So the first thing that we're going to enter in is the number 1 because my data begins on row 1. An additional note about getRange is that it begins with an index that is set at 1, which means that the first value is represented by the number 1, the second value is represented by the number 2, and the third value is represented by the number 3. This might sound basic, but there are going to be instances where you are working with data structures that have an index that begins at 0. Most notably, arrays and two-dimensional arrays have an index that begin at 0. Within this lesson, we are going to engage with two-dimensional arrays, which means that we are going to have a data type where the first value is represented by 0 and the second is represented by a 1. It's always important to identify what the starting point is for your index so that you can calibrate yourself accordingly. So because getRange has an index that starts at 1, when we want to start at the first row, we can enter in the number 1. We're going to enter in a comma so that we can move to our second argument, which is the column that we want to the starting column that we want to access. So because we're starting in column A, that is also the first column, so we can enter in a 1. When we add a comma, we are moving on to the third argument, which is optional, which is the number of rows that you want to go. So in my spreadsheet, I have 9 rows of data, so I'm going to enter in the number 9. I'm going to add another comma, which will then allow me to enter in the final argument, which is optional, which is the number of columns that we want to go. So there are 3 columns in my data set, so I'm going to enter in the number 3. I'm going to go to the right of the getRange method, and I'm going to use a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter once, enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and then I'm going to say logging for transparency. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to say logger.log. I'm going to open up a parentheses. I'm going to pass in that range variable. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard, add a semicolon, and I'm going to hit run. Cool, so the output here is giving me range, which means that we have successfully accessed the data range. But you'll notice that we are not getting any values out of our range. And that's because we need to use a method in order to get our values. So we are going to hit the X on our execution log, and we are going to start exploring the methods that we have to extract data from a sheet. So we're going to delete the semicolon after getRange, and we're going to use the dot method, and then we're going to start typing in V for values, and we're going to type out value. Because this is going to show us some, you know what, actually instead of typing value, delete value and do get capital V value, and this will show us all the value methods that are available to us. So we're only going to focus on these 4, which is get value, get values, get display value, and get display values. I've never used get rich text value or get rich text values. So if you have, and you're watching this video, please leave a comment with some of the use cases that you've used. For our purpose though, we're going to only focus on the first 4 here. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin with get value, and we're going to look at how all 4 methods output data. So we're going to add a open parentheses. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and we're going to use a semicolon. So we're presently using the get value method. So we are going to save our project and then hit run so that we can see what we get. So get value is a hyperliteral name, which means that you are only getting a value. So you can see in our output log, even though we entered in that we wanted to start at row 1, start at column 1, collect 9 rows of data, collect 3 columns of data, we're only getting name. And you'll also notice that name is just structured as name. There's no square bracket, there's no single quote, there's no indication of anything here other than a single value that has been returned. So we're going to hit X, and we are going to copy lines 9 through 13. We're going to click at the end of line 13. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard 4 times, and then we're going to paste the contents of our clipboard. We're going to go to line 16 here, and we're going to go to the end of .getValue, and we're going to make it get values. We're going to hit run. And now you can see that there's a significant difference between get value, which is happening on line 10, and get values, which is happening on line 16. The difference between the two is get value only returns one value, whereas get values returns all of the values and has it structured in a two-dimensional array. This is why it's important that you get comfortable with arrays and two-dimensional arrays, because that is the way that data structures extracted from Google Sheets are going to be appearing to you. Additionally, there are going to be certain methods that you're going to use where you're going to want to write to a Google Sheet where you need to understand how arrays are structured. My fundamentals video dives deeply into arrays in a way that we won't in this video. So if this is the first time that you're hearing about arrays or you're working with arrays and the things that we discuss in this video series aren't clicking for you, then I highly encourage you to check out that fundamentals video where you can explore more deeply what's happening and how to work with them. Now, the other thing that I want to note quickly is that I want you to remember the way that this number is structured here, because this is going to be a significant difference between get values and get display values, which is what we're going to touch on next. So we're going to do the same thing that we did before. So if you copied something else to your clipboard, make sure you highlight one of the data sets that we have entered in here. So in this case, I'm going to highlight lines 15 through 19. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to click to the end of line 19. I'm going to hit enter twice. I'm going to hit the left arrow on my keyboard 4 times. And then I'm going to paste in the range variable and the logger statement. We are going to modify the get values or the get value statement. So let's delete it from the end so that we just have sheet.getRange and then our data range. We're going to resume by hitting .get capital D display value, and we're going to have an open parentheses. So we're just going to log this out so you can see it, but we're not going to keep it. So we're going to run it again. Get display value does the exact same thing that get value does, where it's hyperliteral. When you say get value, you only get one. So if you attempt to write to a sheet using set value or set display value, it's going to give you an error if you're passing a two-dimensional array to it because it's expecting only one value. So what we're going to do, because you can kind of see that it's the same thing, is we're just going to reuse line 22. So instead of being get display value, we're going to do get display values. And when we run this, we're going to get an output that looks very similar to get values. But when we look at the number columns, you can see that there is a significant difference between the two. And it might be very subtle, but as you get more experience, this will stand out more significantly. And that's that get display values is returning a string, whereas get values is returning a number. So if you attempt to do math using the number from get display values, you are not going to be able to do it. It's going to result in 2 strings being used, 2 pieces of text, rather than 2 numbers. So get display values returns how the value appears in the sheet with the formatting from the sheet. So I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet to make this more clear. I'm going to transform this number into a currency. So I'm in the United States, and it turns it into the American dollar symbol. When I run my script, you can see that when I use get values on line 16, I am still returning the number amount, which is represented by .0, which is an indication that it is a float, and thus it is an integer that can have math functions done on it. Whereas when I use get display values, I have this currency symbol here, which is great if I just want to display this data. But if I wanted to do any type of transformation on it, it will no longer work. So I'm going to attempt to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to be using some array comprehension in order to access elements of the two-dimensional arrays. So again, if this isn't familiar to you, I encourage you to check out my fundamentals video. So I'm going to begin on line 19. I'm going to hit enter twice. I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and I'm going to say add two numbers together. I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I am going to use logger.log, and I am going to say range square bracket 1, which means that I want to access the second array within my two-dimensional array. I'm then going to click to the right. I'm going to add square brackets, and I want to access the third element, so I need to enter the number 2, because arrays are 0 indexed, and 0 is 1, 1 is 2, 2 is 3. So I'm going to do range 1, 2 plus range square bracket 2, go to the right, square bracket 2, which means I'll be accessing the third array in my two-dimensional array and the third element. I'm going to hit run. And now you can see when I am accessing the second array's third element, which is 1200, and I add it to the array's third element, which is 34,300, I am getting 35,500 because that is the product of those two values. So I have successfully completed a math function. Now, if I copy that same line and I go to line 28 and I hit enter twice, and then I paste in that logging statement and I hit run, you'll notice that I don't get a math statement, I get a concatenation of two values. So you can see the first part of our logging output is the first value, which is 1,200 American dollars. The second portion that is concatenated next to it is the second amount, which is $34,300. So this is showing us that we are working with two data types that are strings. And when we use the plus symbol, we are doing a concatenation rather than summing our two values, which is what's happening here. So to briefly summarize what's happening here, you'll want to use get values when extracting data that you want to transform within your app script file. If you are looking to extract values because you want to present them in an email or in a slide deck or in a Google document, then get display values might be the method that you choose. Ultimately, what I want you to take away from this is a fluency with the 4 primary methods for extracting data from a Google Sheets workbook data range, which is get value, which will return one value, get display value, which will return the formatted value, get values, which will return a two-dimensional array with the data, or the get display values, which will return a two-dimensional array that will return the data as it is formatted in the sheet. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module, and we are going to add a new script. This video is going to focus on dynamically accessing data ranges. So we're going to call it e_range_access, and we're going to hit enter. We'll change the name of our function to range capital A access. We will save our project and then go to line 2 and hit enter. We'll add 2 slashes for a comment, and we will begin by accessing the workbook. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable that is set to spreadsheet app dot. And at this time, we're going to use one of the 3 access methods that we discussed in our workbook access video. I'm using a bound app script, so I will use .get active spreadsheet with an open parentheses. It takes no arguments, so I'm going to hit the right arrow and add a semicolon. If you are attempting to access data from a workbook that your app script is not presently bound to, then you will not be able to use the get active spreadsheet method. You'll have to either access the workbook using its ID or the workbook's URL. We're going to resume by hitting enter twice, left arrow twice, add 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will access the sheet. Hit enter, tab, and declare a variable called sheet, which is set to wb.getSheet by name above an open parentheses. It has a single argument, which requires a string, which means we will need to use some type of quotation mark, whether single or double quote. My preference is single quotes, so I'm going to use them. We're going to enter the name of the sheet that we want to access. So in my case, mine is called data. Yours might be sheet 1 or something else. We're going to move to the right of our method by hitting the right arrow on our keyboard twice, and then we're going to enter a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will access the range. We'll hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable called data, which will be set to sheet.getRange. We're going to hard code our 4 arguments, which is the row that we want to start at. In my case, row 1. We're going to add a comma, and then we are going to enter the column that we want to start at, which will be column 1, comma, number of rows we want to go. My data has 9 rows of data, so I will enter in 9. And then we'll add in our final argument, which is the number of columns we want to go. My data has 3 columns, so I will be entering it in. We're going to hit the right arrow, and then we are going to use .get capital V values, and we're going to have an open parentheses. We're going to hit the right arrow once, and we're going to add a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will say logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab. We'll do logger.log data. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and we will add a semicolon. Now, this is a standard way that your projects will look if you are just looking to read data from a Google Sheets data tab. So as we discussed in the previous video, there are 4 methods for extracting values from a Google Sheet. The 2 that I would encourage you to use is either get values or get display values. Display values will return the values as they are formatted in the sheet, which means that all of the data will be returned as a string, regardless of the data type. Get values will return the data without any formatting. So in this case, we're using get values. It doesn't matter. You could use get display values. But for our purposes, that's just what I went with. There was no real reason behind it. So we are going to run our project to make sure that we return our data. And you can see that we are getting a 2-dimensional array, which represents all 9 rows of data. So you can see our last row has Rick, Los Angeles, and the number 23, and that is precisely what we get in here. Now again, as I noted, the data output in my console log was giving me a value of 23, even though it's formatted as currency in the sheet. So if you want the formatted version, then you use get display values. Now, the challenge with hard coding get range the way that we have is that if new rows of data are added like this, then we're not going to return that new value, right? So you can see we have it hard-coded as 9 rows of data, and thus the new data that I just entered about David is not appearing in there, which means that you'll have to go back and add in that row anytime that new data comes in. And that's not really a practical solution if you are attempting to script a project, right? The whole point of scripting is anticipating what will be coming, and if you have to maintain it in the way of it will break down if you don't update stuff, it's not a great place to be. You know, you are going to have to maintain scripts because of various things, but changing the number of rows or the number of columns you have is not ideal. So what we're going to learn today is a few methods for making getRange dynamic. So we are going to resume on line 13. We're going to hit enter 2 times, and we're going to hit the left arrow 4 times, 2 slashes for a comment. And now we will learn about the get last row method. We're going to hit enter once, we're going to hit tab. So we're going to declare a variable called last row, and we're going to set it equal to sheet.get capital L last capital R row. And we're going to have an open parentheses. We're going to hit the left arrow once, and we're going to add a semicolon. We're going to hit space bar, and we're going to add 2 slashes for a comment here, where we will say returns the last row with input. We'll hit enter once, enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will do logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we'll do logger.log, parentheses, last row. Right arrow, add a semicolon. So when we run our console log, you'll see that the first thing that we'll get is our logger statement for data, which is returning our 2-dimensional array. When we log out our last row variable, which is accessing our sheet and then using the .getLastRow method, we are returning the number 10. When we go back to my sheet, you'll see that the last row of data, or the last row with input, is row number 10. That's why that number is appearing in my console log, because it's merely returning the row number with input. So for example, if I go to row 20 and I enter in an X, and I go back to my console log and I hit run, you'll see now instead of getting 10, I'm getting 20. Now that's an important distinction so that you have a strong perception of what you're doing when you're using .getLastRow. It's returning the last row with input. And that is different from the number of rows with data, right? So we're not saying that we have 20 rows of data. We're saying that the last row, regardless of column, with any type of input is number 20. Now, input is also an important distinction to make, because our eyes see that X is on line 20. But if we go to line 25 in row K and we hit enter, and we hit space a bunch of times, and we hit enter, this is technically input. So even though there's no characters or numbers there that we can see, when we hit enter, oh, my apologies, that's on line 26. When we hit enter on line 26, you can see that our cursor starts all the way in the middle of our cell over here, which is very different than line 25 where it starts hard left. So when we go back to our console log and we hit run, you can see that it's returning 26. And that's because we entered a bunch of spaces into a cell in row 26, and the getLastRow method is returning the last row with any kind of input. So to review, getLastRow is a dynamic method to identify the last row of data in your data set. And it is a very effective way to access your data range. But you just need to be mindful that it is any input for getLastRow. So if you do have a bunch of blank spaces at the end, that's what it's going to return. So what we're going to do now is we're going to close out our console log, and we are going to change line 10. So instead of hard coding the number 10 in there, we're going to delete 10, and we are going to reference our sheet variable, and then we're going to use .get capital L last capital R row. We'll have an open parentheses, and we'll hit save. We'll run our code, which results in us returning 26 rows of data because we still have that space entered into row 26. So you can see that we are getting all of our data rows here, but we're also getting a bunch of blank rows as well, including that X over here. So we're going to go back to our sheet. I'm going to go to line 26. I've deleted the space. I'm going to delete the X. And I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet. And I'm going to hit run. So now we are getting 10 rows of data, which is great. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to test it out one time. I'm going to add Danny in there. I'm going to say that he's in Pittsburgh, and we will give him a certain amount. And now when we go back and run our script, we have dynamically extracted Danny. Our last row went from 10 to 11. And now we have a system that will allow us to script out a way to extract data values with dynamic rows. So rows can be added, rows can be subtracted, and our script will continue to function as intended to extract our values. So in addition to having the getLastRow method, we also have the getLastColumn method. So we're going to resume on line 19. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to hit the left arrow on our keyboard 4 times, and we're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, where we will explore the getLastColumn method. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable called last capital C call, and we'll set that equal to sheet.get capital L last capital C column. And we'll have an open parentheses that takes no arguments. We'll hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, and we'll hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and then we will log it for transparency. We'll hit enter and tab, and we'll do logger.log, open parentheses, last capital C call. Hit the right arrow, add a semicolon. So when we hit run, you'll see that we will extract the number 3 because we have 3 rows of data. Same thing happens in here. So if we hit enter on in column F and we hit a bunch of blank spaces and we hit enter and we go back and hit run, you'll now see that we're returning a value of 6. So getLastColumn works exactly the same way as getLastRow in that it returns the number of the last column with any type of input. So we're going to go back to our spreadsheet. We are going to delete the blank space there, and now I'm going to remove the 3, and I'm going to do sheet.get capital L last column, open parentheses. I'll hit run, and you can see that we've successfully extracted our data. We are logging out 11 as the last row and 3 as the last column. So we'll just check it out to make sure it works. We'll add in some data into column D, and then we'll just add H to all of them just so that we have some stuff in there. We hit run, and now we should see H for in each array, which we are. We're getting 11 as our last row and 4 as our last column. That's wonderful. So there are going to be times where you are going to want to return all the rows, regardless of whether or not there's data in them, and all of the columns, regardless of if there's data in them. So in addition to the getLast method, there is also the getMax method. So we're just going to briefly overview that. So I'm going to hit enter twice on my keyboard, 4 times on my directional pad, and I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and I am going to demo the max row and column methods. I'm going to hit enter, hit tab, and I'm going to declare a variable called max row, and I'm going to set that equal to sheet.get max rows with an open parentheses. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard, add a semicolon, and then we're going to hit enter, and we're going to declare a var of max call and set it equal to sheet.get max columns. We'll have an open parentheses, hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and logging for transparency. We'll hit enter and tab, and we'll do logger.log max row, hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, hit enter, logger.log, max col. Hit the right arrow, add a semicolon. Okay, so this is just going to return the maximum number of columns and the maximum number of rows. So I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet. I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to hit Command down arrow once, twice. If you're on a Windows machine, it's probably Control down arrow. And I'm just going to get to the bottom of my spreadsheet where you can see I have 1,000 rows in here. So that's the default anytime you create a new sheet in a Google Sheets workbook. And I'm going to hit Command right arrow, Control right arrow if you're on Windows, I believe. And you can see that my last column is Z. So in the English alphabet, Z is the 26th character. So when we go back to our app script and we hit run, our max row should log out 1,000 and our max col should be 26. So you can see here we have our dynamic data range. We have our maximum number of rows with input, which is coming from get last row. We have our maximum number of columns with input using get last column, which is 4. And then we have our max rows, which is all rows regardless of data input, which is 1,000, and get max columns, which is the total number of columns regardless of input, which is 26. These 4 methods are effective tools when you are looking to dynamically engage with a Google Sheets workbook. Get last row and get last column are effective for data extraction and data delivery. Get max row and get max column are more effective for nuanced use of managing data and data delivery. So we will be using them as you progress further into the series, but I thought it would be helpful to demonstrate them so that you have a base understanding. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files menu and creating a new script file. We'll be focusing on the ways that you can write to a Google Sheet. So we're going to title it F_write_sheets. We'll hit enter. We're going to change the name of our function to sheet writer, and we will save our project. We're going to select line 2. I'm going to hit enter once, add 2 slashes for a comment, and we will begin by accessing the workbook that we want to write to. So we'll hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable of WB, which we'll set to Spreadsheet app, and then we're going to use a dot method. So you have 3 options to access a workbook. If you're using a bound app script file, which is what I am using, and you want to write to the same workbook that your app script is bound to, then you can use .getActiveSpreadsheet. That's what I'm going to be using. But if you want to write to a new workbook that the app script is not bound to, then you are going to need to either use openById or .openByURL. So pick whatever method is best for you. I'm going to be using .getActiveSpreadsheet. We'll have an open parentheses because we do not need to define an input. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard and we'll use a semicolon. We'll hit enter twice, left arrow twice, and add 2 slashes for a comment. Now we will access the sheet we want to write to. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable called sheet, and we'll set it equal to wb.getSheetByName. We'll use an open parentheses. GetSheetByName takes a single argument, which needs to be structured as a string. So we're going to add either single quotes or double quotes. I've been using single quotes throughout my project, so that's what I'm going to go with. If you've been using double quotes, continue to do so. We're going to go to our workbook, and we are going to identify the sheet that we want to write to. I want to use sheet 2. You can either type the name in, or you can double click on it and copy it so that you can paste it into GetSheetByName. One reason to double click on the sheet name or the tab is to ensure that there are no spaces after the text characters. So that's one way to make sure that you are correctly entering in the sheet that you want to access. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice. We're going to add a semicolon, and we're going to hit enter twice. We're going to hit the left arrow twice, and we're going to add 2 slashes for a comment. And now we are going to create some data. So we are going to create a string. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable of data, and we're going to set it equal to single quote, and it will be the word hello. So this is a string because it is the characters are entered in between quotation marks. So we're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow twice. Now we will create an integer. We'll hit enter and tab, and we'll call this var data capital I int, and we'll set that equal to the number 5. So the difference between these two data types is one is a string, which is identified by these quotation marks here, and the other is an integer because it is a numerical character and it is not enclosed by quotation marks. So we're going to add a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, and now we will create an array. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable of data capital A array, and we'll set that equal to square brackets, and then we will have single quotes and say hello, and then we'll go to the right of the single quotes and we will add an integer. So it doesn't matter what you're using. We just need some data types so that you can see the various ways that you will be attempting to pass data into a spreadsheet. So we have an array here, which is indicated by the single square brackets. We're going to add a semicolon at the end. We're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow twice, and now we are going to add 2 slashes, and we are going to create a 2-dimensional array. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable called data array 2D, and we'll set that equal to square brackets, enter, square brackets, single quotes, hello, hit the right arrow on your keyboard, add a comma, and the number 5. And then we're going to go to the right, and we're going to add a comma, and then we're going to add another set of square brackets, and we'll add single quotes, and we'll say, hey, hit the right arrow on your keyboard, comma, number 1. You can enter in whatever you want to here, but you just want to make sure that you have square brackets, and then I hit enter so that we could have an easier time of seeing them, but you don't have to do that. And then I have 1 set of square brackets, comma, 2 sets of square brackets. So this is a 2-dimensional array. And the reason that it's a 2-dimensional array is because it is an array of arrays, which is also known as a list of lists. So anytime that you have square brackets like this, that is dependent upon the language that you are using, either a list or an array. And when you have a 2-dimensional array, it means that you have a set of square brackets that encapsulates other sets of square brackets that are comma separated. So the same way that hello is comma separated by 5 is the same way that array 1 is comma separated from array 2. And you can keep going, right? We could have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, as many arrays as we want. But the reason that it's a 2-dimensional array is that these square brackets here on line 19 and 21 are containing other arrays within them. And thus, it is 2 dimensions. The first dimension is the array. So this is array number 1, array number 2. And the second dimension is the individual points within each array. So the values that are comma separated. Understanding how to work with 2-dimensional arrays and arrays are crucial for writing to Google Sheets. When you extract data from Google Sheets, you will receive it in the format of either an array or a 2-dimensional array. Now, of course, there might be times that you extract values as a string or an integer, but if you are bulk collecting data or bulk writing data, meaning writing to more than one row or column, then it's going to be structured as an array or a 2-dimensional array. I focus on this in my fundamentals video. So if you're still a little unclear on how two-dimensional arrays or arrays work, I talk about it a little bit more there. We are going to kind of touch on them in this lesson because we are learning how to write to sheets, but we're not going to really dive into the nuances as deeply as that video. Cool. So we're going to resume on line 21, and we're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, and we're going to add 2 slashes for a comment. And now we are going to explore how to write to sheets. So we're going to hit enter and tab. I am going to collapse this window up here because I don't need it anymore. And what we're going to do is we are going to, you know what, we'll just declare a variable and we will call it writer, and we'll set it equal to sheet.getRange, and we're going to open up the getRange method. So in order to write to a sheet, you need to define the range that you are writing to. So you can't just say, I have some data, just take my data, right? You can't say, write the number 5 or write hello, and then define where you want to write it. In Google Apps Script, you define the range where you're going to write it. And that's kind of similar to, I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet now. That's kind of similar how in here you would be like, okay, I want to write it here, or I want to write it here. You're doing the same thing in Spreadsheet app. You need to define the range that you are going to write to, which means you need to know what you're writing before you write it. So for our purposes, we are going to define just the minimum amounts. So we're going to do 1, 1. We're going to hit the right arrow, and then we are going to hit the dot method in order to open up some of our functions. So you can see within getRange, we have a nest of things that we can do. So we want to write to our sheet. So we're not going to use any of these methods up here because we're not seeing anything that allows us to write to a sheet. We are going to write set, and then I'm going to start typing in the word value. And now you can see that we have 2 different options, 4 in total. We can set value, we can set values, we can set rich text value, or we can set rich text values. Now, I'm not going to focus on rich text value or values because I've never done it. So if you do need that, I apologize. If you have experience with that and you're watching this video, please write it in the comments. But this video is only going to focus on set value and set values. So we are going to begin by using set value, and we're going to have an open parentheses. Set value is only going to write one value to a sheet. So we are going to attempt to use some of our data types up here. So the first thing that we're going to try to do is set our string of hello. So we're going to reference that data variable here. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and we're going to declare a semicolon. We're going to hit save, and we are going to hit run. And we're going to go back to our sheet, and now you can see that the word hello has been written into cell 1, column 1, because we defined in our getRange method starting at the first row in the first column. Great. So now we're going to try writing our data int variable. So we're going to hit run, and we go back to our spreadsheet, and now you can see that we've replaced hello with 5. Now, an indication that number 5 is an integer or a number is because it is hard aligned to the right. Let me see if I can hit back. You can see that hello is text, so it is hard aligned to the left, whereas 5 is hard aligned to the right. So anytime you see a number in a unformatted spreadsheet, meaning like people haven't gone up here and changed the alignment manually, if you're seeing numbers lining up on the right, that's a good indication that they've remained numbers. But for example, if I go in here and I add single quotes to my 5, this is now a string. So when we attempt to write it, oh, no, that's actually fine. In Google Sheets, I apologize, it will understand that this is a number. Some other programming languages will not be able to identify the difference between a string object and an integer. Cool, so that works. So now let's try writing our data array. So we'll hit run. And it kind of works, right? But we don't have our other value in here. So if you use set value, you're only going to write one value. So I just, so that this is a little bit clearer, I'm going to change hello to did both things appear. I'm going to hit run. And you can see that set value is not allowing both of them to appear because of the nature of set value being singular. But it will write, you know what I mean? Like it's not going to give you an error. And just to kind of prove this out a little bit further, we have two comma separated values here, which I believe means that these would be two columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a comma to my get range, and then I'm going to define that we only want to go one row. I'm going to add a comma. I'm going to say that we want to write data to two columns. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to hit run. And you can see that still doesn't work. And what it ends up doing is instead of writing did both things appear and the number 5, we end up getting two instances of did both things appear. So what set value is going to do is it will set values to the range that you want to. So in this case, starting at row 1, starting at column 1, it's going to go one row and it's going to write to two cells, in this case, two columns. But it's only going to write the first value that appears because it is only capable of setting a value. And that same thing is going to be the case with our data array 2D, where we hit run. We are going to get hello and hello because we are just writing the first value. So because of that limitation, I would not recommend using set value in your scripts. The only time that you would potentially want to do this is if you had an instance where you had a single string or an integer. But I don't think that would provide you with enough rationale to use set value, because if your data expands beyond a single string or an integer, then your script is going to break, because it's not going to break, but it's not going to do what you want it to do. Therefore, I think it's wise to use set values all the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete data array 2D, and we are going to, you know what, we'll keep get range. No, you know what, I'm going to change this up. We're just going to start over again and do sheet.getRange, start at row 1, start at column 1, and we are going to use .setValues instead of set value. And we're going to see how each of these data types responds. So for example, we are going to begin with data. So we're going to hit save, and we're going to go back to our sheet, and we're going to clear out the data. So we have just a blank sheet that we're writing to. We go back to Spreadsheet app, and we're going to hit run. And we're getting an error. And the reason for that is that set values cannot write a single string. Set value needs to be structured as an array. So just so that you can see how this works, I'm going to change data to data array. And in addition to starting at row 1, column 1, I'm going to add another comma and say that we want to just go one row. We're going to add a comma and then say that we want to go two columns. This way we have the same number of, we're accessing an equal number of cells that we want to write to, which in this case will be did both things appear, comma 5. So I'm going to hit run. Oh, my apologies. So it looks like this might be like that. Weird. What's going on here? Oh, my apologies. So actually, this is the same issue as data array, where it's not going to take an array, or sorry, as data. The issue between data and data array are the same because the set values method does not take a single value and it doesn't take an array. So what we're going to do is we are going to change our range to align with data array 2. And we are going to go to set values and do data array 2D. So the adjustment and the parameters that you need to have on your screen is sheet.getRange, and we are going to begin at row 1 and column 1. The reason for that is because we want to start writing at cell A1. Our 2D array has 2 arrays within it, which represent 1 row. So the first square bracket is row number 1, and the second square bracket is row number 2. Within each array, we have 2 elements, so we need to have 2 columns for each row. So we're going to hit save, hit run, and now we've successfully written to our sheet. You can see we have hello, hey, 5, and 1. So for set values, you need to structure your data as a 2-dimensional array. So if you have a string or an integer or an array, you will not be able to use set values as they are. But there's a way that you can clean this up. So we're going to remove our 2-dimensional array, and we're going to work with our data variable. But before we write our data variable, we're going to add one set of square brackets and then another set of square brackets. And then we're going to type out data. We're going to change our get range from 2, 2 to be 1, 1. So that means that we are going to be starting at row 1, column 1, and we are going to write to 1 row and 1 column. And then we're going to set values for 2 sets of square brackets and the word data in between. And now when we hit run, we are able to write to our sheet. So let me remove this here so that we can run this again. Cool. So now you see that hello has popped up. We're going to go down here and we can do the same thing with data int. We can hit save and run. And now you can see the number 5 is appearing. And now we will remove data int. We'll get rid of one set of square brackets. So now we should just have one. So we should have dot set values square bracket. And then we're going to type in data array. And we're going to change it from 1 column to be 2. And we're going to hit run. And now you can see that we have did both things appear. So in summary, if you want to write to a Google Sheet, you need to use one of 2 methods, dot set value or dot set values. If you are using set value, you are only going to be able to write one value to the sheet. Therefore, in my opinion, it is a suboptimal option for you to choose when attempting to write to sheets. If you're attempting to use set values, you will have to structure your data payload, meaning the data that you want to write to the sheet, as a 2-dimensional array. And the way that you can modify values that are not 2-dimensional arrays, such as an array or an integer or a string, is by adding square brackets inside of set values before attempting to deliver the data. That way, the data structure will be formatted as expected and will provide you with a dynamic way to send your data to your Google Sheet. We'll be resuming by navigating to the Files module, and we are going to be creating a new script file. We're going to be focusing on how to extract data from one sheet and how to write that data to another sheet in the same workbook. We're going to be titling this G_sheet extractor, extractor, sheet extract. Great. So we're going to change the name of the function to sheet extract, and we will save our project. I'm going to resume on line 2. We're going to hit enter once, 2 slashes for a comment, and we will access the workbook with our data. I'm going to hit enter, tab, and we're going to declare a variable called WB, and we'll set it equal to Spreadsheet app dot. Now at this time, you're going to use one of 3 methods in order to access your workbook. It depends on your situation. If you are attempting to read and write from the same workbook that your app script was created from, then you can use .open or get active spreadsheet, .get active spreadsheet. That's what I'm doing. I'm just going to be giving you a basic example of how to read data from one sheet and then write it to another sheet. So I'm going to be staying in the same workbook. If you are attempting to read and write to a different workbook than the one that your app script is attached to, then you're going to want to use either open by ID or .open by URL. So I'm going to use get active spreadsheet. I'm going to have an open parentheses. I'm going to hit the right arrow once. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on my keyboard twice, and now I will access the sheet with the data I want to extract. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to declare a variable called sheet, and then I'm going to also add to it, I'll call it sheet source so that my naming doesn't get messed up with the name of my function. So we're just going to call this sheet source, and we're going to set it equal to wb.get sheet by name. And we'll have an open parentheses here, open parentheses, and we will pass one argument, which will be the name of the sheet as a string. So I'm going to go back to my workbook, and you can see that I have a tab here called data. So I am going to type data into the get sheet by name method. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment. And now I am going to extract the data. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to declare a variable called data. I'm going to set it equal to sheet source dot get range. I use an open parentheses, and I'm going to go back to my sheet. And now I'm going to define the range. So I need to identify where the data starts, which is the first row, identify where the data starts, which is the first column, right? So we are starting here at cell A1. We have 11 rows of data and 4 columns of data. So what we could do is we could write in 1, 1, because we want to start at row 1 and column 1, and we need to go 11 rows across 3 columns, right? And then we can get, we'll do display values because I don't want to do any math, and we'll have open parentheses. But as we touched on in our range access lesson, we don't want to hard code our data in the event that the data expands or contracts. So we're going to be dynamically extracting our data. So instead of defining the number of rows that we want to go, we are going to use our sheet source variable to get the last row. So we'll do sheet source dot get last row. We'll have an open parentheses, and then we will use the same method or a similar method and do sheet source dot get last column. Have an open parentheses. Cool. So make sure that you have sheet source or sheet or whatever your variable is where you're extracting your data, and do dot get last row. Make sure you have open parentheses in there, comma, sheet source dot get last column, open parentheses in there. And then at the end of your get range method, use dot get display values. So we're going to add a semicolon at the end there. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will be logging for transparency. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to do logger dot log, and we'll have an open parentheses, and we will pass in our data variable. We're going to hit run. And now you should see the data from your sheet appearing in your console log. Now, the thing that we want to start noticing here is that we have 2 sets of square brackets at the beginning, 2 sets of square brackets at the end. That is a very strong indication that this is a 2-dimensional array. And as we discussed in our Write Sheets lesson, data that is extracted from Google Sheets is either going to be structured as an array or a 2-dimensional array. I should say bulk data. So because we are extracting multiple values from our sheet, we are returning a 2-dimensional array through the getDisplayValues method. Now, we could also use getValues, and it will also be structured as a 2-dimensional array. The only difference between getDisplayValues and values is that getValues is returning the unformatted data. So you can see here that in our second array, we are returning an integer for 1200. And when we do DisplayValues, we return a string. It is formatted the way that it is in the sheet as US currency. Cool. So now that we have our data, we are going to resume on line 13. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow 4 times on our keyboard, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will define the destination sheet. So this is where we want to write the data. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable of sheet DEST, which is short for destination. And we're going to set that equal to wb.getSheetByName, open parentheses, single quotes. I'm going to go back to my sheet, and the place that I want to write it is sheet 2. So I'm going to copy sheet 2, and I'm going to paste it into getSheetByName. I'm going to hit the right arrow twice and add a semicolon. So in this tutorial, we are going to be learning how to read data from one sheet in our workbook in order to write it to another. Anytime that you are writing data to a new place, you want to be very careful that you are not overwriting data that you don't want to overwrite. So it is very important that you have sheet source as your variable on line 7 and sheet destination as your destination variable on line 16. You don't have to use those names, but you should have distinct names so you don't get confused about which sheet you are using. Now, if you are looking to read data from one workbook and send it to another, I have some other videos on my channel that show you more sophisticated ways of reading and writing to sheets. We're going to keep this nice and simple because this is a beginner series. So we're just going to be focusing on reading and writing data. So we're going to resume on line 16. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard twice, and now we will write the data to our sheet. We're going to hit enter and tab. So we are going to reference our sheet destination variable. We're going to use the dot method, and we are going to say get range. And we are now going to define where we want to write this data to using the 4 arguments within get range. So the first thing that we want to define is the row that we want to start at. So we're going to start at row 1. We want to write to column 1, which means that the first cell with data will be cell A1. Now we're going to have to get a little bit more dynamic in terms of how we are going to figure out our row numbers and our column numbers. So we're going to add in a comma, and we have to define the number of rows, right? So if we just did sheet destination dot get range and we did dot set values and we did an open parentheses and then we wrote in data and we hit the right arrow and we add a semicolon, we're going to get an error. And the reason for that is because the number of rows in the data does not match the number of rows in the range. The data has 11, but the range has 1. So when we go back in sheet 2, there's some stuff in there from a previous lesson, but nothing like name, location, number, all that type of stuff. So what we could do is we see that the data has 11 rows, but the range has 1. So we're going to add a comma and we're going to enter in 11. So if we hit run, we're going to get another error. And the reason for that is because the number of columns in the data does not match the number of columns in the range. The data has 4, but the range has 1. So we could hard code the number 4 in here, and when we hit run, we have no errors, and we go back to our sheet, and now you can see that we have written data from the data tab to sheet 2. But the problem with that is that in the event that we delete a column and we delete 2 rows, we try to run this again, we'll get another error because now the data has 9 rows, but the range has 11, right? So we have 11 here, but we have 9 rows of data, so we have to manually change 11 to 9. And now we have the issue where we have 3 rows or 3 columns of data, but the range has 4. So we have to manually change the 4 to a 3 and hit run. And now it successfully works. And when we go to sheet 2, you can see we have some existing stuff here, which is a hazard of reading and writing to sheets, that when you write to a sheet, you will end up having pre-existing data, right? So when we ran our data extraction the first time, we had columns, we had column D and we had rows 10 and 11, but now we have rows 9 and through column C. So what I'm going to do, just so that you can see this more clearly, is I'm going to delete this data and I'm going to rerun it. And now you can see that we are getting the data that exists in the data tab. But this is a problem that you are going to want to keep in mind as you think about structuring your project. Because when you use the set values or the set value method in order to write to a sheet, you are just going to set those values. So if your data set contracts, you are not going to remove the values that were previously there. So if you are completely updating a sheet, meaning you don't want to append to it or something like that, it would be wise to write in something like this. So we're going to go to line 16. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will clear the destination sheet before writing. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we can do sheet dest dot get range. And we'll type in 1, 1, 9, 3 dot clear, and you'll have an open parentheses like this, and you'll have a semicolon, so that in the event that, like you can see previously, we had 9 rows of data, 3 columns here, and then we will hit run, and when I go to my sheet, you might not even be able to see it, but it will clear it out before writing into the sheet. So what we're going to do is we are going to change from having 3 columns to 2, just so that you can see this a little bit more clearly. And we are going to have 7 rows of data. So we are going to delete this number column here, and we are going to delete 2 more rows of data so that we have 7 rows across 2 columns. But in our sheet 2, you can see we still have 3 columns across 9 rows. So when we hit run, we're not getting any errors. You can see our data has changed in our console log. And now in sheet 2, you can see that we have not cleared out all these rows in here because we still defined clearing rows 7 and 2. So there's a couple things that we need to do here, which is to dynamically reference our ranges. So what we need to do is calculate the number of rows and columns that we want to clear, as well as the number of rows and columns that we want to write to. So this is where measurement is going to come into play. So we're going to begin on line 19, and we are going to refer to our sheet destination variable. We're going to do dot get capital M max rows, and we're going to have an open parentheses. And then we are going to go to our columns argument, and we are going to do sheet destination dot get max columns, and we'll have an open parentheses. So what will happen now is instead of having this appear as name, location, number, and then having these 2 extra rows that previously existed that have since been deleted, we are going to clear every row and every column in the sheet, regardless of whether or not there is data in them. And then we are going to write the data to our sheet with our hard-coded range size. So we're going to hit run. We have no errors, and we go back to our sheet. And now you can see that instead of having the data that used to be there when we previously ran this, we now have data that represents what is happening on our sheet. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add, no, this is good. So I'm going to copy column C so that I can put it back in there. And then I am going to copy row 8 and 9 so I can put that back in there. And now when we run, we are going to get an error, right? And that's because we have that dynamic issue that we were talking about. But you can see that we successfully cleared our entire sheet, right? So the reason that we didn't write anything here is because we were still referencing 7 rows and 2 columns, but we now have 9 rows and 3 columns. So what happened in our script was we cleared out the range so that we had the opportunity to send in the fresh data. So now what we're going to do is we can do a couple things here. We could reference the sheet source using get last row and get last column. So what we're going to do is we're going to comment out line 22 just so that we can do some workshopping here so that you can see the different methods available to you. So either highlight line 22 and hit Command if you're on a Mac, or Control if you're on Windows, and then the slash button, and then that'll comment out your code. You could also hold it down and re-comment it, or you can just go to the left of line 22 and add 2 slashes for a comment. But we're going to comment it out because we don't want to set values for a little bit. We're going to hit enter twice. We're going to hit the left arrow on our keyboard twice, and now we are going to explore our dynamic data range solutions. We're going to hit enter and tab. So the first option that we have is logger.log, and we could do sheet source dot get capital L last row, and we'll have an open parentheses. So we're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice, and we're going to add a semicolon, and we're going to hit run. So you can see that we're getting that number 9 dynamically now, right? So when we go to our sheet, we're getting this here, right? We're getting the last row of data, which is the number 9. Now, some people have the opinion that you don't want to reference Spreadsheet app more than you have to. So technically, when you're calling a sheet source, you are using Spreadsheet app .get active spreadsheet .get sheet by name. Even though you're using this variable here, you're still calling the Spreadsheet app, which might impact runtime. I'm not as concerned about that, but I do think it is a realistic consideration, especially as your projects get larger. So the other option that you have is, so we're going to be on line 25, we're going to hit enter. You can do logger.log, open parentheses. You could just measure the length of the data array. So we could do data.length, and when we hit run, you're also getting 9. Now, again, I personally think you're still, you're doing the same thing here, so it really doesn't matter what you do. So you could measure the length of your extracted data in order to dynamically determine the length, or you could use your source and use get last row. But for our purposes, I guess what we'll do is we'll go with data.length. That's probably the best practice to go with because that is what you are attempting to write to the sheet. So you should have a consistent method for writing, reading and writing. So we are now going to explore. We're going to hit enter twice, hit left arrow twice, and we'll do explore our dynamic column solutions. And I'm also going to change this from data range to data row. And actually, I'm just going to delete row, dynamic row solutions. So we have basically the same thing. We're going to hit enter once, tab, logger.log, open parentheses, sheet, source.get, capital L, last, capital C, column, open parentheses. We're going to hit the right arrow twice, add a semicolon, hit enter once, logger.log, open parentheses, sheet, source dot oh, you know what? I'm sorry. It's sheet source square bracket 0. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard. Dot length, and we'll add a semicolon at the end. And when we hit run, we should now see 2 instances of 9. And my apologies, sheet source dot length didn't work. Oh, sorry. It should have been data. So on line 30, we should do data square bracket 0 dot length instead of sheet source square bracket 0 dot length. So data square bracket 0 dot length. So now when we hit run, we should get 9933. Cool. So you can see these are your 2 options here. It's really up to you which one you want to use. But these are the 2 methods for dynamically establishing how big your data set is so that you can pass in variables to get range. So at this time, we are going to highlight line 22, and we're going to hit Command if you're on a Mac, Control if you're on Windows, and the slash button. And if that doesn't work, then you can just delete the 2 slashes at the beginning of line 22. And now instead of having a hard-coded number of rows, we are going to use data.length for our row numbers, and then we are going to remove the hard-coded 2 so that we can do data square bracket 0, go to the right of the square bracket, dot length. And now when we hit run, we have successfully written our data to sheet 2. So if we remove a column of data or we remove rows, we can go back to our sheet, hit run, and now you can see we are dynamically defining how big the data is. We are clearing out the sheet so that we are no longer having data exist from a previous version, and we now have a contracted set of data. Additionally, we could add in new stuff, right? Like this. We could add in lots of stuff like that, and we could add in some new rows. And when we go to sheet 2, you can see that we have dynamically calculated that expansion of the data set, and we have written to the sheet, and then we are going to contract it once again. And you can see that the sheet is dynamically responding so that now it has contracted and removed data that doesn't exist. So this is an example of writing to a sheet where you don't want to append values, right? So you have a data set that you want to be uniform with another data set where you copy all the data and then write all the data. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module, where we will be creating a new script file. This lesson is going to focus on appending data to a sheet. So we're going to call it h_sheet_append. We're going to hit enter. We'll rename our function sheet, capital A, append, and we will save our project. So what we're going to be exploring is we have this sheet here, sheet 2, where we have a name and a location. We are going to look to add data to the bottom of this without removing it. So in our previous lesson, we looked at ways to take data from one Google Sheet tab and then write it to another one. But in doing so, we cleared the range so that then we could rewrite all of the data. So this example is going to explore methods for appending data. So we are not going to be working with a sheet. So if you have a sheet that has new data coming into it, this lesson will not focus on that, but this will just explore how to set up a logic system to append data to the next line. So we're going to go back to our spreadsheet app or our app script. We're going to go to line 2. We'll hit enter. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment. And now we're going to access the workbook. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable of WB, which will be set to spreadsheet app dot. At this point, you will pick one of the 3 methods that we have previously discussed in order to access your workbook. I'm using a bound script, so I'm going to be using get active spreadsheet with an open parentheses. It takes no arguments. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard and add a semicolon. If you are not using a bound app script, or if you would like to write data to another sheet or another workbook that your app script is not bound to, then you will have to use the get open by ID method or the open by URL. My apologies, that's not get open by ID, it is open by ID. So you just do dot open by ID or dot open by URL. You're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on your keyboard twice, add 2 slashes for another comment. Now we're going to access the sheet we want to append data to. So we're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable of sheet, and we'll set that equal to wb.getSheet by name, and we'll have an open parentheses. Get sheet by name takes 1 argument, which is a string. So we are going to add single quotes or double quotes. You can pick depending upon what you've been using throughout this project. So we're going to go to our workbook. You can either double click on the tab and copy the name, or you can just type it into get sheet by name. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard twice, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now identify the data you want to write or append. So we'll hit enter and tab. So we are going to create a variable called data, which will be set to a 2-dimensional array. So we're going to create square brackets. We're going to hit enter. We're going to add square brackets. The structure of the data or the range that we are attempting to write to has 2 columns. One is name and one is location. So we are going to want to keep that same column structure. So we are going to add single quotes here, and we will write a name of Kevin, and we will set it comma and have single quotes, and then write Alabama. So we'll just keep it at that for now. We'll hit enter once, enter twice, left arrow on our keyboard twice, add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will dynamically identify the range we want to append to. So we're going to hit enter and tab. So we're going to use that sheet variable from line 7. We'll use the dot method, and we will do get capital R range, and we will have open parentheses. So here's where we're going to use some of the stuff that we learned in previous videos. We are going to want to dynamically identify the last row in the spreadsheet. So get range takes 4 arguments. 2 are mandatory. The first is your starting row. So when you're looking to append data, you're going to be dealing with a dynamic starting point. So you're not going to be able to hard code that you want to start at row 1, column 1, because you don't know what row is going to be the blank row. So what we're going to do is we are going to dynamically calculate the range by using sheet.getCapital L last row. And we have an open parentheses.
So this is going to give us the last row of the sheet, which will return the number 4. So we don't want to write to row 4 because there's already data there. So we're going to go to the right of .get last row. We're going to hit space. We're going to add a plus sign. We're going to add a space, and then we're going to use number 1. So what will happen is sheet.get last row will identify the last row in the sheet that has data entry. It will then add 1 to it, which will give us the first empty row. We're going to add a comma. We're going to start at column 1 because the data is in column A. We are going to go, we'll hard code this for now, but actually, you know what we could do? We could do data dot length will give us the number of data points in our array, and then we will do a comma, and we'll do data square bracket 0 dot length, and that will give us the number of columns in the data, or in the data array, because we are accessing the first array in the two-dimensional array, and then we are measuring the number of elements that exist in there. So in the event that we need to expand this data array, this data square bracket 0 dot length will dynamically expand with it. We're going to go to the right of our .get range parentheses, and we're going to do .set capital V values with an S, and we'll have an open parentheses, and we will pass in our data variable. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard, and we're going to add a semicolon. Now, in order to provide some visibility into what is happening in line 15, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm going to hit the up arrow on my keyboard once. I'm now on line 14. I'm going to hit the up arrow on my keyboard twice. I am now hard left on line 13. So I'm going to hit tab. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment, hit space, and now I will be logging for transparency. I'm going to hit enter and tab. So what we're going to do is we are going to log things out. So we're going to do 3 logging statements in order to look at sheet.get last row plus 1, data.length, and data square bracket 0 dot length. So we're going to write logger.log, open parentheses. We're going to use single quotes, and we'll say this is the starting row. We're going to add a colon and a space. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard and a space. We're going to add plus space, and then we are going to copy sheet.get last row plus 1. And what this will do is it will give us some string comprehension here, so that it will say this is the starting row plus, and then whatever the output is. So we're going to go to the right, we'll add a semicolon, we're going to hit enter, and we're going to do another logger.log, and we'll do single quotes, and we will say this is the number of rows we need. And we're going to add a colon and a space. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard with a space. We're going to add a plus symbol and a space. And now we'll do data.length. We'll go to the right, add a semicolon, hit enter. We're going to do our final log here, which will say logger.log, open parentheses, single quote, and we will do this. These are the number of columns we need. We'll add a colon and a space. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard and a space. We'll do a plus sign and a space, and we'll do data square bracket 0. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard, dot length. Hit the right arrow on your keyboard. I misspelled length there. Make sure all your spelling is correct. Add a semicolon, hit enter, and now we're ready to attempt to run our project. So before I do this, I just want to show you that right now row 5 is empty, and if this works as expected, Kevin and Alabama should appear there. So we're going to hit run. And now you can see that we have an issue here where we are getting a concatenation of sheet.get last row plus 1, giving us 41 in the output console, which hopefully is not how it ends up in the get range, but we'll see that and correct it if we need to. We're seeing that the number of rows we need is 1, which is correct, and the number of columns we need is 2, which is also correct. So we're going to go to our sheet. We are seeing Kevin in row 5. So this might just be an issue with our console log where we need to wrap this into a number, because I think what happened was we concatenated a string plus sheet.getLastRow, which gave us 4, and then the 4 was transformed from an integer into a string because it was concatenated with a string. And then once the number 1 was added, because it was adding it to a string of this is the starting row colon space 4, it just concatenated it all. But when we actually used it in the getRange method, it appeared as expected with the number 5. So what we're going to do now is we are going to act as if we are extracting this data from another Google Sheet. So we will change this name to be Larry and Philadelphia. And we're going to go to the right and we're going to add another array, and we'll do square brackets, David, square brackets, Texas. So what should happen is lines 6 and 7 should have Larry and then David with their associated locations. And then we should get, we should still get row 6 as the last row, right? So we should get 5 plus 1 will give us 6. We should get rows we need as 2, and the columns we need to be 2. So let's see what happens. Cool. So you can see we're getting, this is the starting row, which is number 6. We need 2 rows of data because data.length is giving us the number of arrays in our 2-dimensional array. And then data square bracket 0.length is giving us the number of elements in our array. So we're going to go back in here, and now you can see that Larry and David have been appended to the sheet. Cool. So now what we're going to do is we are going to try another thing here, which will be appending more values. So let's just say that this is like an amount or something. So we're adding in an extra element to our array. And even though we're doing that, we are going to be getting, we're going to be able to write this, even though this will not have a header column over here. The reason I'm doing this is because I want you to see that the columns will dynamically expand. So the same way that we were able to add another array that gave us more rows, adding in more columns here will allow us to write to 8 and 9, A, B, and C. So when we go and run our script, we should get, I think 9 as our 8 as our starting row, and that we need 2 rows, and then we need 3 columns. And when we go to our data set, you can see that Debbie, Philadelphia, and the amount, Barry, Texas, and the amount are written to the sheet. So the whole point of this was to give you a sense of the underlying logic to append data to a sheet. I personally don't have many projects where I append data. I would rather extract the full amount of data and then write it to the sheet as a complete data set. That way I don't duplicate data or I don't miss data or anything like that. So, the extraction method is going to be a similar thing that is going to be dependent upon your project. The approach here was to give you an introduction into how to write appended data to a new environment. If you do have projects that need to have dynamic data extraction for the purposes of appending, feel free to reach out in the comments or send me an email. The best thing to do is to give me an example sheet. You don't have to give me your live data, especially if it's sensitive, but if you just kind of give me a mock-up of how the data is flowing in, then I'll do my best to craft a solution around it. My use cases are primarily coming from databases or from faux databases. So a database is something that a data engineering team manages, and a faux database is something where like I have peers who enter data into a spreadsheet or an Airtable base or whatever, and they just want to get it from there and put it somewhere else. So a lot of my stuff is not focusing on appending. It's really about just extracting all the data entry and then moving it places. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files module where we will be creating a new script file. This video is going to teach you how to add and remove rows and columns from a sheet. So we're going to call it I_add_remove. We're going to hit enter. We'll change the name of our function to add R remove, and we will save our project. We're going to select line 2. We'll hit enter once, 2 slashes on our keyboard with a space, and we will begin by accessing the workbook that we want to modify. We're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable called WB, which will be set to Spreadsheet app. We're going to be using one of 3 dot methods, which will be dependent upon your circumstances. I'm using a bound app script, which means that the workbook that I am looking to modify is the same workbook that created this script file. If you're attempting to modify a workbook that your app script was not created from, then you're going to need to use .openById or .openByURL. If you are using a bound app script like I am, then you can use the getActiveSpreadsheet method with an open parentheses. It doesn't take any arguments, so we're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard and add a semicolon. We're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes on the keyboard and space, and now we will access the sheet we want to modify. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable of sheet, which will be set equal to wb.getSheetByName with an open parentheses. It takes a single argument that needs to be structured as a string, so that means you need to use single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter what you use, just make sure that you're consistent with whatever you've been using to this point in the project. I've been using single quotes, so I will enter them now. We're going to go to the sheet that we want to modify. We're going to select the sheet tab name, or you can just note it and then type it or paste it into the getSheetByName function. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard twice, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on your keyboard twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will define the last row in the sheet. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable called last R row, which will be set equal to sheet.getL last R row. Open parentheses, hit the right arrow on your keyboard, and add a semicolon. GetLastRow is a function that returns the last row in your sheet that has any kind of data entry in it. The technical way of describing it is that getLastRow returns the last row with non-null values. So even if you hit enter and add a bunch of spaces in there, that is considered non-null because there is data entry even if it's not a text or a number character. So getLastRow is going to return, in my case, row 9. So I'm going to hit enter 2 times, add 2 slashes for a comment, and I'm going to add some logging. I'm going to hit enter and tab. I'm going to do logger.log, open parentheses, last R row, hit the right arrow on your keyboard, and add a semicolon. So when I hit run, you can see that it returns the number 9. I'm going to hit the resume on line 13 and hit enter twice, and the left arrow on my keyboard 4 times. I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and now I'm going to define the max row in the sheet. I hit enter and tab, and I'm going to declare a variable called max R row, which will be set equal to sheet.getM max rows, open parentheses. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard and add a semicolon. Max rows returns the last row in the sheet or the max row in the sheet regardless of data entry. So in my sheet, I only have 10 rows. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 1,000 rows to the bottom of it. So now I have 1,010 rows. and the last row with data is number 9. So when I go back to my script, I hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and I'm going to add some logging. I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I'm going to do logger.log, open parentheses, max capital R row. I'll hit the right arrow on my keyboard and add a semicolon. So now when I run it, you'll see that I'm going to get a 9 for my last row, and I'm going to get 1010 for my max row. So the thing that we're going to do here is we are going to remove all the blank rows underneath our data, and then eventually we're going to do the same thing with the columns. So what we're going to do is go back to our script, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on our keyboard 4 times, add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will define the blank rows. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable called blank capital R rows, and we'll set that equal to max row minus last row. Add a semicolon, hit enter twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and hit logging. We'll hit enter and tab, and we'll do logger.log, open parentheses, blank capital R rows. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard and add a semicolon. So when we hit run, you'll see that we'll get 9, 1010, and then we'll get 1001. So now we have all the data that we need in order to delete our rows. So we're going to resume on line 25. We're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow 4 times, add 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will remove the blank rows. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we will do sheet.delete rows, open parentheses. So the first value that we're going to enter is last capital R row. But it's important to note in the documentation that the way that delete rows is structured is the first value is your starting position. So you can see here it says rows start at 1. This deletes the first 2 rows. So because they entered in 1, 2, they start at row 1 and delete 1, 2 rows. So we're going to want to modify our last row variable by hitting space +, space 1. So we're going to add 1 to last row. That way, instead of starting at the last row and then deleting rows, we are going to start at the first blank row. And we are getting that logically by getting the last row with non-null values, adding 1 to it to then get the first row with null values. And then we're going to use our blank rows variable in order to identify the number of rows that we need to delete starting at the first null row. So we're going to add a comma after our last row +1, and then we are going to pass blank rows. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard and add a semicolon. We're going to save our project, and we're going to hit run. You can see that we have no errors, and when we go back to our sheet, you can see that now we have deleted all of our blank rows. However, our logic now breaks down if we try to run it again. And the reason for that is because we do not have a 10th row in our sheet, right? So we have 9 rows in here, and we are saying start at row 10 and delete the blank rows. And it can't do that. So we're going to add in some error management. We're going to hit enter on line 27, and we're going to enter try. We're going to have curly brackets, and we're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard. We're going to hit enter. We're now going to pass in catch, and we're going to have another set of curly brackets. Try catch is Google Apps Scripts and JavaScript's version of if error. So if you've ever used if error in a spreadsheet, it allows you to run some logic or a function or whatever. And if you get an error, then you have an ability to change the output from an error message to some type of custom protocol. In the case of try catch, it allows us to attempt or try to run some logic. And if there is an error, it is caught so that the rest of the script can complete. So when we tried to run sheet.getDeleteRows, we got an error. We got an exception error because there are rows out of bounds. So we're going to copy line 30. We're going to delete it. We're going to select in between try, the curly brackets. We're going to hit enter, and we're going to paste it in. And now when we hit run, we still get the same output, but our script compiles without error, and our data set remains unchanged. So that is working exactly as we want it to. And what we'll do is we'll click in between catch, and we'll hit enter, and we'll add a log statement so that we know that it happened. So we can say this caught an error, and we'll add an exclamation point. So now when we hit run, you can see that we caught an error. So we're going to resume on line 33. We're going to hit enter twice, and now we are going to insert a row at the bottom of our data. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we will reference our sheet, and we will use dot, and then we will do insert rows after. And then we're going to have an open parenthesis. So this works the same way as our delete rows method. However, this inserts rows after your starting position. So in this case, we can use last row, we can use a comma, and then we can enter in as many rows as we want to. So I'm going to do comma 1. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want just a little bit of padding. You know, I don't want 1,000 blank rows, but I don't want no rows. So we're going to delete all of our blank rows, and then we are going to add in 1. So we're going to run our script. And you can see that it completes without error. And when we go back in here, you can see we now have 1 row at the bottom of our sheet. So if we try to run our script again, you'll see that we actually deleted 1 row. But because of our logic system, we inserted another row. So now we have a logical way to always make sure that there is 1 row at the bottom of our sheet and that we are removing excess rows. So now we're going to do the same thing for columns. So we're going to hide the last row variable. We're going to hide the max row variable. Blank rows are going to get hidden. Our try catch is going to be hidden in here. And we are going to start at line 36. We're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow on our keyboard twice, and we'll collapse line 35 because, oh, sorry, we won't do that. So we will start on line 38. And now we will define the last column. So we'll hit enter. I'm going to fix my typo. We'll declare a variable of last column. And, oops, sorry. And we will set it equal to sheet.get capital L last column with an open parentheses. We'll hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, define the max column. So we'll hit enter and tab, and we'll declare a variable of max column, and we will set it equal to sheet.get max columns, open parentheses. We'll hit the right arrow on our keyboard, add a semicolon, hit enter twice, hit the left arrow twice. Now we will define the number of blank rows, hit enter, tab, var, columns, blank, capital C, LOUMNS, equal to max column minus last column, parentheses. I'm going to change my comment so it's correct. We're going to hit enter twice. We will remove the blank columns. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we'll use our try curly brackets, hit enter, and we'll do sheet dot delete columns, open parentheses. Same thing where it deletes things at the starting position. So we'll do last column +1, comma, and then we will pass in our blank columns variable. We'll hit the down arrow once, we'll hit enter, and now we will do our catch, and we will do open curly brackets, we'll hit enter, and we'll do logger.log, open parentheses, single quote, an error has been caught, exclamation point. Hit the down arrow, hit the right arrow twice, hit the down arrow twice, hit enter once, hit the left arrow on your keyboard 4 times, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will add in a column. We'll hit enter and tab. We'll do sheet.insert columns after, open parentheses, last column, comma 1, hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, save your project, and let's see what happens. Cool, so this compiled without any errors. And now you can see we have 1 blank row, 1 blank column. We attempt to run our script again. We have no errors, 1 blank row, 1 blank column. Cool. So this is working exactly as we want it to. This is going to provide us with a programmatic way to consistently have one blank row and one blank column. We're going to resume by navigating to the Files menu and creating a new script file. So we are going to be learning how to add style elements to a sheet. So we are going to call this J underscore style underscore elements. Hit enter. And we will change the name of this function to style elements, and we will save our project. So we're going to begin by going to our spreadsheet. So we learned how to dynamically remove blank rows and blank columns. So I'm going to show you the way that I like to format data. So I like to have one blank row, or sorry, one blank column to the left and right of my data tables. And then I like to have one row above and below. And then I resize both the columns. So I am on a Mac, so I held down Command and I selected column A and column D. If you're on a Windows machine, I don't know how to do it, but I would presume you hold down Control and then you select the columns that you want to. Then you can right click and resize the columns, and I typically will resize them to be 25. So now I have just kind of like a nice tight environment where I can stylize a table. And recently I've started to style my sheets using AppScript. So I might like create a template view of data, but sometimes the requirements change. So I've started to use AppScript in order to reformat by inserting extra columns, inserting extra rows, and changing style elements so that I can change borders and lines and headers and all that type of stuff. So we're going to be exploring ways to create a border around this data. We're going to learn how to remove the grid lines, and we're going to learn how to add different types of style lines throughout. So we're going to go back to our script, and we're going to go to line 2. We're going to hit enter once. We're going to add 2 slashes for a comment, and the first thing that we're going to do is access the workbook. We want to style. So we're going to hit enter and tab. We're going to declare a variable of WB. We're going to set it equal to Spreadsheet app. We're going to use a dot method. You have 3 options, and it is dependent upon your circumstances. If you are using a bound app script, meaning that it was created from the spreadsheet that resulted in the script file that you're working in, then you can use .get active spreadsheet, and you'll have an open parentheses, and you will not pass any arguments into it. Hit the right arrow, and you can add a semicolon. If you are looking to style a spreadsheet that is not your app script project is not bound to, meaning like you created this script project either in Drive or from another file type, and you're looking to access another workbook, you'll need to open it by the ID or open it by the URL. So you can use spreadsheet app.openbyid, spreadsheet app.openbyURL. Cool. So we're going to hit enter twice, left arrow twice, 2 slashes for a comment, and now we will access the sheet we want to style. We're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to declare a variable of sheet, and we're going to set it equal to wb.getSheetByName. We'll have an open parentheses. It requires a single argument that needs to be formatted as a string. So you'll add single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter. Just remain consistent with whatever you've been using to this point. We're going to go back to our sheet, and we're going to identify the name. You can either double click on it and copy it, or you can go back and type it in. I'm going to copy and paste it. My sheet is called sheet 2, so that's what I'm putting in there. And hit the right arrow on my keyboard twice. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice. I'm going to hit the left arrow once, and I'm going to add 2 slashes for a comment, where I will define the data range. So I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I'm going to create a variable called data, capital R, range, and I'm going to set that equal to sheet dot get capital R range, open parentheses. Get range takes 4 arguments. 2 are mandatory, 2 are optional. We are going to use all 4 arguments. The first argument is the row, the starting row that you want to access. So in my sheet, I have a blank row number 1, which means that I want to start at row 2. So I'm going to go back to my app script, and I'm going to put in 2, comma, space. The next argument is the starting column. So the same thing is happening here, where I have a blank first column. Therefore, I want to start at column 2. So I'm going to go back to my app script, and I'm going to enter in 2. So what's happening here is we are defining the second row and the second column, which when we are in our spreadsheet is cell B2. The next argument is defining the number of rows that you want to go. So we are going to dynamically do this so that if it changes, like if it expands or it contracts, then our script will be able to adapt to it. So we are going to add a comma, and we will reference the sheet variable, and then we will use the .get capital L last row function, and we'll have an open parentheses there. It takes no arguments. We're going to hit the right arrow on our keyboard. We're going to add a comma. We're going to hit space, and then we're going to do the same thing for our columns. So this last argument defines the number of columns you want to go. So we're going to do the same thing where we reference our sheet variable, and then we do get last column. Open parentheses, no argument there. Hit the right arrow once, right arrow twice. Now, this is not going to work the way that we want it to, because sheet.get last row and sheet.get last column will define the last data row with an input value, which is also known as the last non-null row or the last non-null column. So the result will be 10 and 3. Now, the problem with that is that we are starting at row 2, column 2. So the get range method will go 1, 2, 3 for the columns, and it will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for the rows. So then if we do not modify get last row and get last column, then we're going to end up with this data range here, which would give us a null row and a null column, which we don't want. So we are going to click to the right of sheet.getLastRow. We're going to hit space. We are going to subtract 1 from sheet.getLastRow, and we are going to do the same for the column. That way, when we return the last row number, we are compensating for the null row in row 1. So we are subtracting 1 because we don't want that null, and we are compensating for the null column of number 2, and therefore getting a transformed number to accurately reference our data range. Cool. So now that we have our data range, we can start doing stuff. So we're going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow once, add 2 slashes for a comment, and hit space. We are going to add a border around our data. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we can call data range dot, and let's see, we can set border, and we can open up our parentheses. And set border has several arguments. The first argument is the top. The next argument is left. The next argument is bottom. The next argument is right. The following argument is vertical. and the final argument is horizontal. So I'm going to explain what that means in here. So basically, when you are inputting arguments into set border, you are beginning like so, where you are referencing the top, right? So that's when you put a line up top here, that is the first value. The second value is determining if a line goes to the left. The third value is looking at the bottom. The fourth value, as you can see here, is going to look at the right. Now, when it's talking about horizontal, it's talking about whether or not lines, if you were like going across multiple ranges, if those lines go that way. And then vertical is talking about if you have a range like this, if you're going to have a line down the center of all of these things, or if it's just going to be top, left, bottom, right. So you have to put in all of these arguments. In getRange, in the .getRange method, you have optional arguments. So you can enter start row, start column, and the method will work even if you don't put in the number of rows you want to go or the number of columns you want to go. But with set border, you either have to put in true, meaning there is a line, false, meaning there isn't a line, or null, which just means that nothing happens. So we are going to set a border, a square border around our data. So we are going to enter true for top, and then we'll enter true for left, and we will enter true for bottom, and we will enter true for right. And then we will put false for vertical and false for horizontal. And we'll go to the right. And let me see if there's another, oh, we also have coloring that we can add in here. So we will add a single quote, and we will do black, and then we will do a comma, and we can reference Spreadsheet app again, dot, border style, dot, and then we can do solid medium. We'll just see what that looks like. Cool. So we will hit save, and we will hit run. And when we go back to our sheet, you can see that we now have a bold border around our data range. So you may be asking yourself, why do we have to put in false, and why would you put in null? Well, if we change, so we want our top, we want our left, let's say we don't want a bottom, so we'll enter in false. And let's say for conversation's sake, we don't want right, but we enter in null, and we hit run. Then the result is that we no longer have this bottom line down here because we set it to false. So we were distinctly stating, do not have a bottom line. Whereas when we put null, null is basically saying don't change anything. So if a line already exists, it will continue to exist. Whereas if we change that null to be false and we rerun our script, the right line is going to go away because we have now distinctly stated do not have a line there. So the set border method provides you with three options in a Boolean fashion. Boolean means it's either true or false. In this case, you also have the ability to enter null, which means no change. So true means that there's going to be a line there, false means there's no line there, and null means that there is no change to the line that is presently there. So we're going to go back, and we are going to add true for our bottom line. So we're going to have true as our top, which is 1, true for left, which is 2, true for 3, which is bottom, and true for right, which is 4. And then we're going to have false because we don't want center lines, and false because we don't want vertical lines. You can see here that you can just write in whatever number you want to, or whatever color you want to, I'm sorry. Let's see what happens if I put in red. Cool, so now you see we have a red bold border there. And then using the style elements, this was a little bit difficult for me. I'm going to change red back to black. This was a little bit difficult for me as I was learning how to style things in AppScript. It's not intuitive that you would have to call spreadsheet app.borderstyle.solidmedium, but when you use spreadsheet app.borderstyle, you see that you can have dashed lines, dotted lines, double lines, solid medium, solid thick, right? So we did solid medium, and now we are going to hit enter twice, hit the left arrow once, add 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to add lines in between our rows. So we are going to, you know what, I want to have, okay, you know how I'll do this? I want to have dotted lines in between these rows here. And then I want to have a box around my header up here, and I want these to be bold. So what I'm going to try doing is I'm going to try using our data range to set the dotted lines, and then I'm going to set a header range so that then I can add style elements to the header. So I'm going to hit enter here. I'm going to hit tab, and I'm going to try data range dot set border. And we are not going to have a top line. So we'll say that's null because we want it to remain true. We are going to say null because we don't want the left line to change. We're going to say null because we don't want the bottom line to change. And we're going to say null because we don't want the right line to change. We don't want a vertical line, so we're going to write in false, but we do want a horizontal line, so we're going to enter in true. We're going to add a comma, which is where we have the ability to enter in our color. And I didn't note this, but you can enter in a hex code, or you can just enter in a color name. So if you want to work with hex codes, I apologize that I'm going to jump around here. You can stay in your AppScript file. I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet to just show you where the hex codes are available. So you can either click on the text color or the fill color or any place where you have access to colors. And then you can click on this plus symbol here for custom color. And then this is where you can find the hex code. So this gives you the ability to have more dynamic colors, right? Where it's like, I'm not an artist, I just play one on the internet, and I don't know like what the name is for some of these shades of red or black or what have you. But if you did want like a unique color like this, you could copy the hex code with the hash symbol like this, and you can paste it in here. But I'm just going to go with simple single quotes black. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard, add a comma, and now I'm going to do spreadsheet app dot border style dot, and then I'm going to use a dotted line. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard and add a semicolon. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit run. Now, what I want to have happen is I want dotted lines to exist within my data range. So it's a little bit difficult to see now because we have grid lines in here. So what I'm going to do is teach you how to remove grid lines. So we're going to go back to our script. I'm going to hit X. I'm going to go to the right of the add lines in between our rows. I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow once, 2 slashes for a comment, and we are going to remove the grid lines. So we're going to hit enter and tab, and we're going to reference sheet dot, and then I'm going to type in set hidden grid lines, and this is just a Boolean. So you can either say true if you want it hidden, or false if you don't, or you can just like not type it. So we're going to do true, hit the right arrow, add a semicolon, hit save, hit run. And now when we go back to our sheet, you can see that we no longer have grid lines, and these dotted lines that I've added are more prominent. So now we have the beginnings of a very nice looking text box here. So another thing that we could do is center these values, right? So I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow once, 2 slashes for a comment, and I will be center the data values. I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I'm going to reference sheet dot, and I'm going to type in alignment, which I don't seem to have. So you know what? I'll do data range dot, and then I'll type alignment. And there we go. We got horizontal alignment. So, oh, sorry, we'll do set horizontal alignment, open up parentheses, and then you have the ability of just entering in left, center, or normal. So I'm going to add a single quote, and I'm going to type center. I'm going to hit the right arrow twice. I'm going to add a semicolon, and I'm going to hit run. And now you can see that all of my data values have been centered. So what I would like to do now is work on this header row here, because I want that to stand out more. So I'm going to go back to my app, and I am going to click on line 22, and I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow once, 2 slashes for a comment, and I am going to define the header range. So I'm going to hit enter and tab, and I'm going to declare a variable called header capital R range. I'm going to set that equal to sheet.get capital R range, open parentheses, and I want to start at row 2, comma, column 2, comma, and I only want to go one row, comma, but then I want to have a dynamic sheet.get capital L last column, open parentheses, hit the right arrow, hit space, minus space 1, because we have to renormalize for starting one column over. The reason I'm only going one row is because I know I have one header row. I'm not going to have a multi-index header. I just want to have one row that has some names so that people know what the type or category or whatever is. But for my columns, those could expand over time. So I want my getRange method to be dynamic so that it can expand and contract. I'm going to hit the right arrow on my keyboard. I'm going to add a semicolon. I'm going to hit enter twice, left arrow once, 2 slashes for a comment. And now we will add a border to the header row. We're going to hit enter, tab, and we'll do header range dot set border, open parentheses. We want a top, we want a bottom, or a left, we want a bottom, and we want a right. And then we can do null, comma, null, because we don't care about the vertical or the horizontal. Or rather, we don't want them. So I'm actually going to set them to false. I mean, you can keep it null if you want to, but I'm just being overly cautious to make sure that they remain empty. And then after the final false, we're going to do comma, single quote, black, right arrow on your keyboard, comma, space, spreadsheet app dot capital B, border style dot solid medium, and hit the right arrow, and I am going to add a semicolon. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave the semicolon off for now because we're going to try and go back to it. So we're going to hit save, and we are going to hit run. Cool. So now when we go back there, you can see that we now have a box that makes our header row more distinct than the rest of our data. What we're also going to do is we're going to add a background color so that this stands out a little bit more. So we are going to go up into our color wheel here, and we are going to find something, I don't know, doesn't matter. You can pick anything you want to. This is a fun chance to play with hex codes if you want to, or you can just enter in black. It's really whatever you want to do. So you know what? I'll do black just to keep it Nice and simple because that's just hash 3030 zeros. Okay, so we're going to resume on line 28, and what we're going to do is we're going to go between header range and set border, and we're going to hit enter. That way it's nested under. I've started to get into the habit of doing this so that I can kind of see like what things are building up into one another. So after set border, so we're going to go to the right on line 29, we're going to do dot, and we are going to get background. And we're going to open up a parentheses, and now we're going to pass in a string that gives us a hex code, or that gives the program a hex code. So we're going to add single quotes, and for black, you can do hash 6 zeros. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go back in there, and I'm going to do hash 123 123 for 6. I'm going to click on in between the end of set border and the beginning of dot get background. I'm going to hit enter. Now, if we have a black background and we have black text, then we're not going to be able to see it. So what we're going to do now is hit dot, and we are going to, oh, I'm so sorry. Actually, we did dot get background. We want to do dot set background. So my apologies for that. You want to have set because we are setting things here. So we're doing set border, set background, and now we are going to set font color. And we'll do open parentheses, single quote, and I'm just going to type in white, but you can also enter in, I believe, 6 Fs is the same thing as white. And that's what this documentation is saying here. So you can use either or. And then we're going to go to the right, and we're going to do dot set font font weight, and we can you can either like we can enter in bold or normal. So I'm going to enter in single quotes bold. I'm going to hit the right arrow, and I'm going to add semicolon. I'm going to just kind of format my lines so that I have them all stacked. So I am setting my border so that I have that header box, and it's going to be black with solid medium. And I'm going to set the background color to black. I'm going to set the font color to white, and I'm going to set the font weight to bold. So I'm going to hit save. I'm going to hit run, and we're going to go back in there. And now you can see we have a fully stylized data table that is pretty much presentation ready. And this is typically what I would return as a deliverable for my 9 to 5. So this is, I think, a great way to distribute data so it's more aesthetic. And you can just take a screenshot of it, paste it into Slack or email or all that type of stuff. Just so that you're aware of it, I'm also going to show you just how to change the font size and the font, like the font itself. So I'm going to pick like a very funny, so we'll try and do lobster, right? That way we have this like very funny looking font. Because why not make it stand out? So we'll get rid of our semicolon here. We'll do dot set capital F font family, and we'll open up, and you can see you can just pass in a string. So we'll do single quotes, and let's try doing impact. Or you know what? We'll do lobster. That way, we'll see. And then we are going to go to the right, and we will do dot set font size, and we will change it from 10 to 11, and we will stack our style elements. We'll add a semicolon at the end, we'll hit enter, and we will run our code. No errors. We go back to our spreadsheet, and now you can see that we have a much larger font 11 as opposed to 10, where we have like our default fonts in here, and we have size 11 font, which you can see up here, as opposed to that. So there's a lot of really cool style elements that you can add into your spreadsheets, so that if you do ever come up with a situation where you have a project out in the wild and people want to change it, you can create what I like to call code patches by using AppScript. And I very recently had a project like that where the scope expanded And instead of having to create new workbooks, I just scripted, the code patch, and then I pushed it out to all the workbooks by looping through the IDs and coming up with a really cool portfolio project. So I hope you found this helpful. I think this is a video series that I can add to over time. So if you do have questions, comments, or things that you'd like to see, I'm happy to add to it. Check out my video or check out my channel. I have all of these videos broken out, as well as the entire lesson as one video. I also have a fundamental series that breaks down some of these concepts. And I wish you the best of luck on your data journey.